Also, in the context of Ecuador's general elections, let's welcome political scientist Eduardo Meneses. Hi, Eduardo, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Really, thank you for the invitation.
Ecuador's elections have been overshadowed by an unprecedented social insecurity, economic fall, energy crisis. But to understand today's reality, let's go backwards. In what way the return to neoliberalism in 2017 has impacted and transformed Ecuador's social and economic landscape?
Well, we need to understand that what is happening right now in Ecuador is the result of a very coherent policy from the elite of the country. The richest people of Ecuador, which is a very few people who have this economic power and who have been opposing the progressist policies for many years. When they arrived to the government, what they did were, I would say, two main things. The first one was definitely changing totally the direction of the economic policy, which was translated by first making a liberalization of all the bank system. The problem is that Ecuador is a dollarized country. We do not have our own currency. We do have the dollar, the United States dollar, and opening and making this liberalization of the banking system, what resulted was, in fact, in the possibility for all these economic elite and all these rich families from the country to bring their dollars who were being invested or forced to be invested in the country and bring them to external banking out of Ecuador, and that was a huge blow to the country because we cannot produce our own currency. We are dependent on these US dollars, and while the richest people of the country, the biggest economic elite, was bringing those dollars outside, our internal economy was being deeply impacted and being reduced each time more. The answer to this economic recession that was created by these policies was, in fact, to start a very accelerated and deep program of loans with the EMF. We have already known all these loans with the EMF for decades before, in the 80s, in the 90s, and it's what has generated a big dependency in these multilateral organisms because it's not a debt that we can pay. In fact, we are taking each time debt just to pay the interest of the precedent debt, and we are just going down and down into a spiral of debt that cannot be solved. And that's what has caused the big crisis, the economic crisis in Ecuador, which resulted in having the biggest poverty rate since the pandemic. Resulted in having more than 60% of the people of Ecuador being in the informal sector of the economy, meaning that they do not have social rights, they do not have contracts for working, they are working in very precarious conditions, and also has resulted in a huge increase of the public debt directed to these organisms like the EMF.
Precisely, you mentioned in the US, Ecuador's multidimensional crisis has skyrocketed the migration of its nationals abroad, especially towards the US. How this reality could reshape Ecuador's diplomatic relations with the US amid the xenophobia and massive deportations that are being unleashed by President Donald Trump?
Well, there are two things here. First is that the fact that we have this big migrant population, Ecuadorians living in the US, is not something new. In fact, it's new the fact that we do have a big wave that started during the last years. I would say just after the pandemic, there was a huge wave. But in fact, there was also a previous wave in the 90s. We were all exactly the same EMF recipes that pushed out millions of people out of Ecuador. And in fact, I would say that it is possible to have a sovereign diplomacy with the United States, even if we have all these families and this big amount of migrants living in the US, working, even if it's not always in a legal way, but being there. What has changed is not essentially that fact. What has changed is the fact that the foreign policy of the government of Ecuador since the 2019 has totally shifted into a non-sovereign policy where we have seen our presidents been defending the U.S. interests rather than the Ecuadorians' people interests. We have seen all of our presidents start even violating our constitution for allowing, for example, the presence of military bases from the US in our country, the entrance of military forces from the United States to our country. So I would say that what has changed from the Ecuadorian side is more an internal perspective on how do we drive our foreign policy. But now that we have this turn of events with Trump in the US, who is taking out all these migrants that have been arriving from this late wave, that will be a big problem, an economic problem to the country, because a lot of the US dollars that were coming to our economy, and again, I will reinforce that, we have a dollarized economy in a context where our banking system has been liberalized. So all of our dollars from the economic elite is being brought out of the country. The dollars that were coming in from those migrants who were working in the US, who were sending money to their families, was a huge contribution to the Ecuadorian economy. Now, this will definitely have a big blow in our economy, not only in terms of how these migrants are being treated, and we haven't seen any reaction from the Ecuadorian president towards that, but also in the economic perspective, which will bring an even more difficult situation to the country.
Let's stay on topic regarding foreign policy. How might the election result affect its foreign policy, particularly regarding Latin American integration?
Well, we have seen in the last 7 years the same since Lenin Moreno arrived to the government. We have seen little by little Ecuador passing from one of the countries who was pushing the most for the regional integration of all South American and Latin American countries into a same region that could implement policies towards our people, toward the development of the region, sovereign policy. We have seen a radical shift towards Ecuador becoming one of the main factors of disrupting the integration process. I could definitely say that Ecuador, Argentina, are two in the South American side, are two of the main countries who have been defending the US position, who has historically been against the integration of our continent, against the integration of South America, against the integration of Latin America, because obviously if we are divided, it's much more easy for the US interests to be penetrating our economy, penetrating our political class, defending the US interest instead of our people's interests. And sadly, Ecuador has become, I would say, with Argentina, the two main countries who are breaking all the possibilities of the regional integration, who are not at all participating in the dynamics that could be in the interest of our people in creating regional policies, industrial policies, policies to develop our internal commerce between our countries. And we have seen Ecuadorian policies going exactly in the opposite way.
Thank you. Thank you, Ramon, very much. Eduardo, my pardon, for your remarks on this paramount event.
Sorry, I couldn't hear your question.
I was saying that thank you very much for your time hearing from the South, Eduardo.
Thank you. Thank you very much.